Okay. Well, I hear there's just under 80 new students, and I don't see 80 people here, so I'm assuming there's some people missing. But I just want to make a request. I think we can all fit in these two sections. And if you sit way in the back, then what happens when other people come in? Where are they going to go? Way to the furthest parts of the room. So why don't you all come close, and then they'll think, oh, I guess I need to be up close too. And you'll be able to see the board better. Yes, even you in the back left-hand side. I know you're trying to get as far away from me as possible, but I promise I will not hurt you. Awesome. There is, oh, okay. Let's see if this one works. Oh, ooh, that's a juicy one. I like it. Okay, so I am a teacher of sorts, but not the kind of teacher you probably think of. Did anybody tell you what you guys are doing here tonight? No. Nobody told you what you're doing here? Did they call it anything? Vespers. Oh, this is Vespers? Oh, okay. Nobody told me it was Vespers. And yes, you too can come and join us over here. My name is Amanda Anguish, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. You are all here for therapy. We're going to talk about your deepest, darkest thoughts. You're going to have to share, I'm just kidding, you don't have to do that. I have been a teacher here at Weimar. I used to teach the Psychology 101 class, I guess, several years ago. But I work full-time at Beutiful Minds Medical, which is about 10 minutes from here in North Auburn. And every year they ask me to come and talk to you guys. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is how to think. Do you think that's important? Yes, it's absolutely important, especially when you're starting school. I know you've all been to school before. I'm assuming you've all been to school before. But one of the few things that we don't get taught until often much later in life, and often after we've already experienced some setbacks, is how to think about the things that are happening to us. So I'm going to give you a very practical lesson in how to think. If you do have paper and a pen, that would be helpful. If you don't, and you're desperate at the end of this, and you have your cell phone, you're welcome to take a picture of the board. Is that okay? I'm okay with you taking pictures. So if you haven't already read Mind, Character, and Personality, has anybody read that book? Sections of it? Yeah, it's a compilation book. It's Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White wrote it, but she didn't really write it. Who wrote it? God. Yeah, God told her what to write. And if you read throughout that book, especially in the second volume, you'll notice there's actually a section called Thought Control. And that section's very important, and I'm taking from that section in teaching you this, okay? So I am what they call a cognitive behavioral therapist, but there's a caveat to that. Any cognitive behavioral therapist won't necessarily teach you biblical cognitive behavioral therapy. So just keep that in mind as I'm sharing some things with you tonight. But I want to share with you something that I think will help you, not just with school, but just about everything that you deal with in life, if not everything that you deal with in life. And I'm happy to see parents here too, because then you can reinforce this when your kids call you and go, oh no, this happened. You can go, oh, remember what Amanda taught you in that first week that you were here? and then you'll be able to reinforce that and stuff. Thank you so much for sharing paper with my students tonight. So if you look at that piece of paper, what will help you is if you turn it the landscape way, because I'm going to use the whole board, okay? And I am going to just start with oops, 5 letters. You think you can handle A through E? You don't even have to remember the rest of the alphabet, just A through E. But this is going to be useful because each one of these letters is going to remind us of something that we need to do whenever we go through a difficult situation. I typically call this, this talk, I think it was called positive thinking or something when I was asked to do this and they told me what they wanted me to talk about. But I like to call this steps to Christ-like thinking. When you think of the verse that says that Christ counted it as joy to go to the cross, has that ever made you think twice? Like, counted it joy to go to the cross? Yes. Does that not sound ironic? How many of you would count it joy to go to a cross or any kind of suffering? Now, I know you've all studied your Bibles, but I like to consider that when Christ counted it joy, what he was considering is not what was happening right then, but what? What he saw happening in the future. And sometimes this is the case when we're going through something difficult. We all heard Dr. Nedley talk today about, the Israelites murmuring. What were they focused on? What was happening in the now. They weren't considering what God could use that situation for in the future. And that's often what we're doing when we look at this, these ABCs. So I'm going to break it down for you, and this is something really practical you can take into every situation. Things like test taking, friendships and other relationships, even family problems that you might have. Maybe you're distant from family, but you're going through that stuff, or they're going through things, and you're considering what's at home while you're here. So the first letter stands for activating event. Activating event, we call it activating event because it starts with an A. That's the only reason. We could call it many other things. Some of the other things we could call it is triggers or stressor. But we call it activating event because it starts with an A, and that makes it easier to remember, right? But when we think of, say, triggers, what do you think of when you think of a trigger? A gun. Yeah, there aren't too many things with a trigger, but we often think of a gun. Now, a trigger does not make a gun go off. Did you know that? It only starts a chain of events. But there have to be other things involved in that gun to make the gun actually go off. What are some of the things that a gun needs in order to go off? Powder, bullet. What's the thing right behind the bullet? Hammer. Okay, yeah. So a trigger merely starts a chain of events, and that's what I want you to think of when you think of activating event. Do you know we have activating events all day, every day? I'm going to break those activating events into 2 categories. The first one is external. What does external mean? It's outside. And so when we talk about external activating events, we're talking about something outside of me, right? Or something outside of you. And those involve 1, people, and 2, circumstances. Now, when I say people, I don't mean necessarily the whole of a person. Sometimes everything about a person triggers us. But you don't have to dislike a person for them to activate something. It might be something that somebody says. It's not even just that person. It's if anybody says this thing, It can activate me. It can also be something they do. Can you think of anything that somebody says or somebody does that might activate you, something inside of you? I'm okay with hearing examples. Oh, that's a good one. Yes, so if somebody chews with their mouth open and you get to see all those particles of food going up and down with the up and down of their jaw, yeah, that might activate somebody. Does that activate anybody here? Yes, okay, that's a good example. Now, what would be an example of something a person says? Gossip, okay. Anybody oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so for example, when people like behave in a certain way that like you like recognize that it's something wrong, but it reminds you of yourself, and you see yourself in someone else.
Man, that's kind of deep. Are you studying therapy?
My dad loves to talk about self-improvement.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, sometimes people do things. I used to work in a group home with at-risk teens, and we would call those people haters. You know, when somebody does something better than you or something that you can't do, you kind of hate on them because, oh man, I wish I could do that, or, you know, they're able to do something I'm not able to do yet. Kind of call that haters. How about politics? Anybody get triggered by people talking about politics? I just triggered you all, but just by saying that. I saw a lot of reactions coming from saying that. There's a lot of stuff within our faith, within politics, that get a lot of people triggered right now, and all you have to do is look at social media and see how that affects people. But that is definitely an activating event. How about circumstances? Sometimes these are related to people, but they're more specific to something happening. What would be an example? Yeah.
Like being a hypocrite and like finding behind their back, and
Okay.
like them contradicting themselves just in plain sight, and you seen them lying when you actually saw them did it.
Okay, yeah, that would be a good example. I think that would probably have to do with people, but circumstances, did you have one?
Yeah.
Okay.
This summer I was actually in an environment where I didn't really have opportunities to exercise.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so maybe there's something that you typically get to do, but you're limited, and you can't do those things anymore. Yeah, go ahead. Making decisions. Okay, yeah, maybe you're stuck between two different decisions. One of the things that I hear a lot of people your age talk about is things like, I want to do something really big in life, but I don't know what that is. You know, I want to do something really big for God, but how do I know what that is? That's a circumstance where you might be triggered. By the way, I always tell you guys, what did Moses have to do? We heard this today in the sermon. What did Moses have to do before he led the Israelites out of Egypt?
Be in the middle of nowhere for 40 years.
Yeah, he spent 40 years tending sheep. What did David have to do before he became king? He had to tend sheep. Now, isn't that one of the lowliest things that you could do back then? One of the things I'd like to suggest to you guys is that God can't necessarily use you for something big unless he can trust you with something small. So please do not overlook the small opportunities in your life to be faithful, because when we're faithful in little, we'll be faithful in much. So don't jump ahead of yourself. Another circumstance would be like traffic. Sometimes people don't like traffic, right? That's a circumstance. How about the weather? How many of you love the smoke? Now, I'm super excited because today seemed like a lot of it cleared for a while. But I can tell you this is one of my triggers, my circumstance triggers, is when that smoke comes out and I'm like, oh, I don't like breathing it. I love sleeping with the windows open, and it's so painful to have to keep them shut because it's not actually fresh air that I'm getting when the window's open. So yes, those are examples of circumstances which are external. But if we have external, what else do we have? You guys are smart. You can graduate now. So internal, yes. Okay, so internal, Now, this is the tricky one. Whenever people come back to me as their therapist and they're like, I've done all this stuff you told me to do, but I can't figure out my activating event, I always point them back to this one. Because internal has to do with inside of me, which means my feelings and my thoughts. Now, there's something specific about this, though. Do you know that each one of you have a certain type of thinking and feeling unlike other people around you? You can just look at people and go, yeah, we think differently and we feel differently. Some of you might feel a little bit more melancholy most of the time. And you look at other people who seem happy all the time and you're like, why are you happy all the time and I'm feeling like this? And others of you are happy and you're looking at somebody else who's maybe a little bit more melancholy and you're like, why aren't you as happy as I am right now? What's going on? We each have our own feelings and thoughts that I would like to suggest are default. Now, this doesn't mean you can't change your default thoughts and feelings, but this just means we all typically have a certain set of default thoughts and feelings. And that means there are certain thoughts that you tend to go back to that maybe the next person doesn't. And sometimes what happens is it's people and circumstances in the past that have set us up to have these certain feelings and thoughts. So say maybe when I was growing up, I had a teacher who didn't treat me so well and said, Amanda, you know, I'm wondering about you. I'm not sure you're going to make it. And then I started thinking to myself, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I can't study. Maybe I don't do test well, and that sort of thing. And my teacher is no longer around. That was my first grade teacher, and I'm still telling myself that. And now I'm like twice your age, so I could still be telling myself, and I work with a lot of people who do still tell themselves those things. Somebody early on in their life told them something, and it is stuck so hard that they're still carrying around those thoughts and feelings because they're default. They've already created a rut in their mind, and they just keep going right back to that same thought and that same feeling. And you know, sometimes we actually get addicted to our feelings, our negative feelings, and we just keep going back. It's like we like to hurt ourselves, even though those people aren't around that maybe initially did that to us. But each one of you have certain feelings and thoughts, and I'd like you to think about what yours are. You know, what are the things that you think over and over and over again in your head? What are the things that you feel often? And these things, you don't even have to have a person or a circumstance trigger them. They just come right up. You could be having a decent day, and all of a sudden that old thought comes back up. And you're like, where did that come from? Why does it have to ruin my day today? It just keeps coming back up and up and up and up. Each one of us has these, though. Now, I would like all of you to have really nice default thoughts and feelings. But sometimes we have to work through some stuff before we get there. So just because it might be your default now doesn't mean it has to be your default in the future. And we all know that word. You're here in a wonderful place that believes in the whole of us. And there's this wonderful word called neuroplasticity. And do you know what that means? Neuro is your brain, and plasticity means your brain is flexible. You're not stuck that way. You might feel stuck, but it doesn't mean you are stuck. And you're going to learn a lot about neuroplasticity while you're here, but I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get fixed because she just talked about this and that's where I am and it's all negative stuff, okay? But when we talk about activating events, remember we called them also triggers. So, what do they trigger? Yes, they trigger beliefs. They trigger a belief. Every single time a person says something or does something, every time there's a circumstance, even if it's my toaster that doesn't pop my toast up, or I forgot to plug it into the wall and I just went and did something, I came back expecting fully toasted toast, and it's still bread, that can be an activating event. Even when I have those feelings and thoughts, That can be an activating event, but what happens next is what I believe about that activating event. And that makes the next part keep going. So belief, why do we call it a belief? That's an awesome answer, but that's not the correct answer. It is a correct answer, but not the one I'm looking for. We call it a belief because it starts with a B. Sorry, it was a good answer, but I always get people on this. So activating event because it, belief because it. What are some other words that we could use for beliefs though? We often think of beliefs in terms of like religion and spirituality, but that's not the whole of what a belief can be. I believe that if somebody does something nice for me, it's my obligation to say thank you. That's a belief. So beliefs can also be thoughts. They can be self-talk. They can be our interpretation of something, our perspective. If you want to really impress people, you can call it a schema. These are all other ways of saying the exact same thing. Now, do you notice I've repeated a word in two different columns? Yep. It's in the same thing. Did you know that a thought can trigger another thought? Do you know there's a word for that? And I literally just forgot it right now. Man, you should all stand on a stage sometime and realize words that you know that go completely, oh, I know what it is. Thank you for waiting with me. It's called a metacognition. All it means is thinking about what you're thinking about. Do you know you do that? We just don't often realize how much we do it. That just means like when you're going for that extra plate of food and you're thinking, oh, this would taste so good if I got some more of that, and then you stop yourself by going, yeah, but that's probably not the best thing to do right now. That's a metacognition. You just thought about what you initially thought about. So we can have initial thoughts, default thoughts, and then we can have a belief about those thoughts. But we can have a belief about any one of these things. But whatever we choose to believe about this, and at this point in the formula here, what often happens is it's irrational. It's irrational. We have to have a problem before you can have a solution. And this is our problem. When these things happen in our life, these are typically negative things that happen, or we would consider them negative things. But as soon as these things happen, a lot of times we'll have an irrational belief about it. And whatever we choose to believe about this brings about the C. There's a consequence for everything I believe. This isn't like consequences when you get in trouble at home with your parents. These consequences are how I feel and what I do. Did you know that everything you believe has a direct consequence in how you feel and what you do? But this belief right here, this is a choice. Do you know what that means? I can choose to believe something, and actually you're always choosing what you believe. So I'd like you to consider you work at a factory, and in your factory you are standing at a conveyor belt, and on that conveyor belt is all kinds of fruit coming down the conveyor belt. Let's just say they're bananas or something like that. And your job is, you work for a factory that only sells the best bananas. And so when you have that box in front of you, your job is to take only the best bananas off of that box and put it, or off that conveyor belt and put it into your box, and you're to let all the other bananas go on through. Now obviously you can't take all of them off of there. Somebody else may take some off of the conveyor belt too, but this is just your conveyor belt. you don't want to take off rotten bananas, right? And in the same way, your brain has, we'll just call it a conveyor belt. And you have anywhere between 12,000 and 80,000 thoughts that go down your conveyor belt. But every time you choose a belief or choose what to believe, it's from that conveyor belt. What does that mean when you choose an irrational belief? You've let maybe a better belief go down the conveyor belt. So if you have trouble thinking things that help you, it just means that you haven't been realizing, oh, I have other choices of what to believe, and I'm pulling the wrong ones off. Another analogy is, does anybody know what this area is known for historically? Gold, yeah. If you went down to the river, down to the confluence, and you started panning for gold, but you realized, you know what, I'm going to do this differently than everybody else. I'm just going to dig my pan in, and I'm going to take it straight to the bank. I'm not going to sift it. That's too much work. You get it down to the bank, what's likely to happen? They're going to laugh at you. They're going to be like, I don't know if you really take it to the bank, maybe a gold shop or something. Let's pretend we're in the 1800s. You go there, and they're going to go, what did you just brought me a bunch of sand. What am I supposed to do with this? And you say, but that's what I have. And they're like, yeah, but you're supposed to sift through it until you get the gold chunks. Then you bring it back in. That's the same with our thoughts. Sometimes we're just grasping either a piece of sand or a bunch of sand, and we're not considering, hey, I'm supposed to go for the gold here. What does that mean? Sometimes we just take the first thought that crosses our mind. And that's often the irrational one. But do you know you're still choosing? Do you know the best part of this word is if you're choosing, you're not actually a victim. Because if you're choosing, then you get also the choice to change it. If it had to do with just what people said and did, if it had to do with just what the circumstances were, if it had just to do with your default thoughts and feelings, then you'd be a victim. And everybody would have to feel sorry for you all the time because you just don't have the right thoughts. But that's not true. Whatever you think, you have the choice to replace it with something else. But whatever we choose, if it is irrational, what kind of feelings are you going to have? If you choose to believe something irrational, what are the consequences of that in terms of your feelings and your behaviors? What's that in math? A negative. You're going to have negative feelings and negative behaviors. Do you know that some people think I'm psychic? Do you know why they think that? Because I can look at somebody's behaviors and tell them what they think. And they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, well, all I have to do is look at your behaviors, and then I know that you're thinking something irrational, and it's not too hard to figure out what that is. Is there something spiritual that we know about, too, in terms of this? Who else knows maybe what we're thinking, but doesn't actually know our thoughts? Satan. All he has to do is look at your behaviors. And sometimes our behaviors is just what we talk about all the time. Sometimes it's, how we're feeling. What are our feelings? Our feelings don't just stay inside of us. They come out. They come out in all different ways, oftentimes even in our behaviors, because if I feel sad, what can I do? Or what do I wind up often doing? Moping, crying, complaining, feeling sorry for myself, talking about all the bad stuff that's happening to me. What must I be thinking if I'm doing that? That's great, but what specifically? I want you to be creative. What do you think I'm thinking if I'm doing all those things? Yourself. Yourself. What am I thinking? Myself? No, what am I thinking? Nobody loves me. What else might I be thinking? You're not good enough. I'm not good enough. What else might I be thinking?
I'm fundamentally wrong.
Yes, there's something fundamentally wrong about me. that can't be changed. Or this is just my lot in life. Nothing good ever happens to me. Can you see how easy it is to know what somebody's thinking just by looking at their behaviors? What do people who do drugs think? Okay, there might not be anything better in life. What else? I'm not good enough. Yeah, I'm worthless. Maybe it's other people can get through life without this, but not me. I need something extra, just to boost me up that much. Other people might not need it, or sometimes they think everybody needs it. Because how many people do they know? Do they know everybody? Maybe the only people they know are doing it. But whatever we believe is going to come out in our behaviors, and it's going to come out in our feelings. I have just made you all very dangerous. Right? Don't go around like sizing people up. Right? That's what they always say about me. Like, are you trying to get in my head? Like, I don't really need to. I don't do this all the time. But it's true. Whatever we think or believe is going to come out in consequences. How I feel and what I do. So interestingly, did you notice another word that gets repeated on this board? Feel. Did you know that if I'm feeling negative, maybe I'm feeling sad. And so, because I'm feeling sad, I believe this is never going to change. My life is just going to continue to be this bad. How am I going to feel? Yeah, even worse. It doesn't get better if I believe something based on that feeling and it's irrational. It's not going to get any better over here. Now, I do want to explain something though. Do you know that not all feelings are intrinsically negative? Can you be sad for a good reason? So sometimes feeling sad is not an indication necessarily of an irrational belief. I could have lost somebody I dearly loved, and I could be sad. But what happens when I add this to it? Now what does that tell you about what I believe?
There's no possibility of change or improvement.
The loss of this person, nothing good is ever going to come out of my life now because of that. So that's what makes me now hopeless in addition to just sad. We never want to add hopeless to it. As soon as you add hopeless to it, that tells you there's an irrational belief. Now, any negative behavior is an example of, okay, this is irrational. But I can have some sad feelings. Is anger ever an appropriate emotion? Sometimes we're scared of this word. We think we have to beat somebody up to be angry. But there are righteous reasons to be angry. We should all be angry at the effects of sin. Satan, all of that stuff. But it doesn't mean we go around yelling at people and punching them and all that sort of stuff. It just means that I can be angry and still have hope. If I add hope to anger, now I'm not going to do negative behaviors. I might actually do something quite positive in that situation, even though I'm angry. What might be a positive thing I do even though I'm angry?
Go do something kind for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I go talk to somebody. Do you know sometimes what we do when we're angry? We just sit and we stew about it. Sitting and stewing is not necessarily a positive behavior. So if I go and I say, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on here, but I'm feeling all kinds of stuff, anger. I'm going to go talk to that person and get some clarity on it. Maybe I don't know what really happened. Do you know one of the best behaviors that comes out of rational thinking? Or let me turn it this way because we're still in the negative here. The first three are the negative spots. Do you know one of the worst behaviors that comes out of irrational thinking? Lack of creative problem solving. If you have negative thinking, you stop right there. You don't keep going. You already know what's right, even though you're wrong. And then you stop being creative about problem solving. I already know that person is this and this and this and this and this, so you never go talk to them now. because you've already judged them for who they are, and you're ready to sentence them to whatever purgatory you can come up with, and you're not going to go talk to them now because you know. But what's in fact the truth? Maybe I don't actually know. Maybe I just think I know, and without some more clarity, I can't make up my mind about what to believe. I meet a lot of people that they stop because they already believe something irrational, and then they wind up looking really foolish later. Do you know one of the best things that you can do in your brain, and your brain is always fighting against it, but one of the best things that you can do is merely say to yourself at this point, instead of the irrational belief, do you know what? I don't actually have enough information to make a belief about this. Do you know why your brain doesn't like to do that? Because your brain doesn't like lapses. Do you know how we know this? If you think you remember, have you ever thought you remembered something accurately, but then you only found out you didn't actually remember it? Yeah. Do you know when I do this the most? When I read something and I think, oh, I know exactly where that is on the page, and I go to where I think it was, and it's not there. And only after a long, laborious search for it, I find it's not anywhere on the page I thought it was, and it's on a different page, on a different even part of the page than I thought it was. And I go, wow, man, my brain is all over the place. Because I think I know. Do you know most of the time what we actually remember is based on how we feel, not based on accurate information? So if you're upset, then you'll actually remember it in terms of you being upset, so you can justify that feeling. We call it emotional reasoning. We make decisions based on how we feel. So if you're recognizing that your feelings and your behaviors are an indication that maybe your beliefs are irrational, then the next thing that you need to do is dispute. And why do we call it dispute? Okay, you're paying attention. Good job. Yes, we have to dispute, and it starts with a D, yes. But what we're doing, this is the problem up to this point, this is the solution. So what we're disputing is actually the belief, the irrational belief. And how do we do that? Two main questions. If you were my client, we'd do a lot more in this area, but I'm going to break it down into two things. We have to ask two questions. Is this true? Now that seems really, really simple, but sometimes the simple things are the things we overlook. Do you know, oftentimes when we have certain irrational beliefs, we never stop to ask, you know, is this really true? We would overcome a lot of problems if we just asked that one question. Is it really true? How do we know if something's true? Evidence for it, yes. If you're in a court of law, the lawyers are going to bring to the judge what? Or they're going to bring to the jury evidence. If you're doing a scientific experiment, don't you have to have evidence in order to publish that? You know? And sometimes they even go to the extra job of having other people look for evidence that you might have missed. And what do we call that? Peer review, yes. So when we look for, or when we ask the question, is it true, we have to look for evidence. What is the best source of evidence that we as Christians have? The Bible. Do you know we ask other people if things are true? What would happen if I asked people if I was an okay therapist or if I was a good therapist? I might have some people say I'm not. I might have some people say I am. Do you know, in 1 week, I was told by somebody I was a poor communicator, and an entirely different person, unassociated with that first person, said I was a great communicator. Now what do I do? How do I know? I had one person tell me I was horrible or a poor communicator, and another person tell me I was a good communicator.
Ask them why.
Yeah, sometimes I can ask them why. Do you know the first person who told me that? Not that I have to be a great communicator, that's not really important to me. The first person thought that because they misunderstood an email I wrote. They thought I knew something that I didn't, and when I responded, they thought I was asking a strange question because I already knew the answer to it. And I was literally saying, I don't know what's going on. And they thought I was being like a smart aleck, like, I don't know why this is happening. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's so sad. For 2 months, this guy thought I knew what was going on, and I didn't. And he just kept saying, Amanda, you don't know how to communicate, and you're not a good communicator. You need to ask your friends if you're a good communicator or not. I thought, well, that's kind of weird. If I ask my friends, they're going to tell me I'm a good communicator. But I didn't even know why at first. And so that's not the best thing to go by. But sometimes we have to ask God. And there's a lot of stuff in the Bible and even Spirit of Prophecy that gives us better evidence than what some people might tell us, right? Now, not necessarily about communication or how good of a communicator I am, but is that even important? And that goes to the next question. Is this helpful? Do you know sometimes we make mistakes or we do things that aren't so great? But instead of just working through it, what we'll say to ourselves is, I'm horrible, I'm horrible, I'm horrible. And we do that not just for the day. We might do it for a week, we might do it for a month, we might do it for many years. If you were listening to Dr. Nedley's sermon this morning and somebody next to you didn't hear what he said and said, hey, what did he just say? I'm taking notes, I missed it. And you tried to explain it to them, what automatically happens when you're explaining it to them? You miss the next part of what he's saying, right? And you're always playing catch up, even if you decide to play catch up. Sometimes you just get way lost in behind and you never catch up. And that's the problem with when we ask ourselves, is this helpful? Do you know how many times we tell ourselves something that's not really helpful to say, even though it is true? One time, one of my friends told me, and I don't remember which one it was, not the friend, but the thing. She said, Amanda, you know one of your nostrils is higher than the other? What do you think the first thing I did was? I went and looked in the mirror, because I hadn't noticed that about my nostrils yet. And so I looked in the mirror, and I stared, and I was like, actually, you're right. One of them is higher than the other. And then the next next thought I had was, how really important is this? Do we all have nostrils that are the exact same size and height and width or whatever? How much does that really matter? Does everybody have the same exact nose, the same exact hair, look the same? No, but do you know what? There are people in the world that think we all have to look the same, or we all have to have certain features that look a certain way. And so what do? We keep staring in the mirror, trying to figure out a way to make whatever we have look like what somebody else has. Is that really helpful to focus on that or to think that? No, what winds up happening? We do have irrational thoughts and feelings and behaviors out of that, but what else happens is we're focused so much on that thing, we might miss a quality that we have that is actually quite useful, and we're not using that quality because we're so focused on this one over here. And it's not helpful to do that. And the same way, I am guessing somebody in this room at some point in your education, you're going to have a hard time with something. Maybe you won't do well on a quiz or a test or a homework assignment, or you won't get the grade that you want. Now, I'm not saying those things aren't important, but let's just ask the question, how important are they? Now, this might cause some frustration with one of your teachers when you go, well, Amanda said this isn't that important. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I don't want you to stop growing in that area because you're stuck in the fact that you didn't do well. And the more we stick with that thing, it's not helpful because we're not moving forward. And if you catch yourself talking to yourself in a way where you stay stuck rather than moving forward, you have got it all wrong. You're missing the opportunity to learn from that situation. You're missing the opportunity to grow from that situation. And I'll just tell you a little story. I had a client, one of my first clients that I ever had when I was working in substance abuse counseling or in treatment. And this woman came to me, and unfortunately, when you are a beginning therapist, they put you in the worst situations because I think they figure, well, how much can she actually mess this person up? They're already pretty bad off. Now, that's my way of looking at it. But this woman came to me, and she had been in her substance abuse addiction for a very, very, very long time. And while I was in school and I was training to be a therapist, I had to actually practice therapy. And I'd have to come back and show my supervisors what I was doing. We would videotape them and audio tape them. And I say tape because it was a while ago. But I actually had to get my client to give me permission. And this woman I wanted to use as an example of the work that we were doing because I felt good about the work and I wanted my supervisor to clear it for me. And so I had her sign the sheet, and I took the sheet back to my supervisor, and he looked at the date and he said, Amanda, did you notice the date on this? And I said, yeah, I know it's off, but she's dealing with drug stuff, and a lot of people we sometimes mess up the date on stuff. We write the wrong month, or maybe when it's the change of the year, we forget to, go a year ahead. Well, I thought, yeah, no big deal. And he said, no, you need to take this back to her and ask her about it. Okay. So I took it back to her and I said, hey, did you notice that you put the wrong date on it? And it was like a 5-year difference. And I thought, yeah, she's probably just off and stuff. And she looked at it and her jaw dropped. The date that she wrote on there was the date that her son drowned. Do you think she was maybe stuck 5 years before when that all happened? She had not moved on at all from that. Now, she was changing some things, and I thought, oh, she's doing much better. But she was still stuck there. And it was only because I went back and asked her about it that I got to realize, wow, she's been stuck. Is what she's saying to herself helpful? No, because she's still stuck in that moment. But as soon as we ask these two questions, and there's many other questions that we can ask within these two areas, but if it's not true, and if it's not helpful, then we have to change it into something that is. And this is what we call reframing. Reframing is, let's just see. Okay, that picture back there. You see that picture back there? Would you say that the frame on that picture complements the picture? Yeah, this isn't a trick question. Maybe somebody in here is a designer by heart or something like that. But no, it matches the picture. It's not detracting from it. But say tomorrow you came in here, and instead of that frame, there was maybe a foot-wide frame all the way around the outside of it, and there were unicorns and rainbows and all kinds of fluorescent colors with like glitter and all kinds of weird stuff on it that maybe like your little 5-year-old sister had done. Now, would you say that complements the picture? No, but do you know sometimes when we're seeing something, it doesn't change the picture, but it changes the way we see the picture. And sometimes the frame that we put around the thoughts that we put around the things that are happening in our lives actually changes the way we see the picture. And so we have to learn to reframe it. We have to put the right frame around the picture, around what's happened, the right frame around the people in our lives, the right frame around the circumstances, even our own feelings and thoughts. We have to put the right frame around it. And so reframing is merely taking an irrational belief and turning it into a rational belief because it is both true and helpful. Do you think you guys can do that? I hope so. Now, sometimes this takes asking somebody else. Like, hey, does this sound accurate? Because sometimes we get so emotionally connected to what we're believing, even if it's irrational, that we can't see straight sometimes. So sometimes we need to ask somebody else, and the best person to ask is really God. And sometimes that means sitting on something for a while. Maybe it means taking a walk first, talking to somebody else, and then coming back and reframing it. But as soon as you do, and you have a rational belief, and now mind you, an irrational belief doesn't have to be 100% wrong. It could be 99% right and one little error in there. Like for instance, if I say to myself, I believe everyone is worthwhile and valuable except for me. Now, there's a lot of truth in that, right? Except for the part when I get to, except for me. And do you know what I tell people when they say that? I say, you're special, just not that special. Why do you get to be the only outlier? Why do you get to be so awful that you're not special? But do you know how many people think that? They think like everybody else is okay except for me. So reframing has to be 100% rational. It can't be irrational, it has to be rational. But as soon as you have a rational belief, then what you will have is effective change. And effective change just means now my feelings are going to be positive and my behaviors are positive. And so you'll notice, just like I can tell what you're thinking because of your behaviors and your feelings, now people will be able to tell there's a change in you because the way you feel and the way you're acting is different too. But do you want to know something even better than that? That change is actually going to have an effect on the way people treat you now, or the things that they say and do. That change is going to have an effect on your circumstances. Do you know some people really complain about traffic? Do you know what other people do rather than complain because they have much better beliefs? They plan for traffic. They listen to a great podcast. Speaking of podcasts, I am a co-host on a brand new podcast that just came out. And it's called the Brain People Podcast. So if you are ever stuck in traffic, you can turn on the Brain People Podcast. That's the Brain People Podcast. And you can make a much better use of your time in traffic. Okay? Also, how about this part? Sometimes we think we can't change. But do you know they say the plant that you water is the plant that grows? What if I'm not watering all those old feelings? What if I'm not watering all those new old thoughts because I have new thinking, and because of that new thinking, I have new feelings? They die. That old stuff starts dying. And I am actually an example of that. I used to deal with really, really bad anxiety, and oftentimes when you experience anxiety, what comes along with it? Depression. And if you have really bad depression, then what comes with it? Anxiety. And so I used to have some really bad feelings and some really bad thoughts. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I do not have diagnosable depression or anxiety at all. And that is largely thanks to the fact that I know that God gives us a brain, and He also gives us some control over how that brain works. He gives us the power, and it's up to us what we do with it. And so I'd like to suggest to you that the reason that Christ was able to count it as joy was because He had the right thinking. But He also gives us the principles that we can have the right thinking too. One of the ways that you can do this, and you can even reframe your thoughts, is practice taking promises from the Bible and replacing your old thoughts with them. You don't even have to come up with your own new thoughts sometimes. Sometimes you can just take something from the Bible. And it's very easy nowadays if you have the internet. You can literally write what Bible verses talk about. You put that in there, and you'll get a whole list of Bible verses if you're not acquainted with which ones are going to help you. You write that on a card, and you carry that with you until you have it extremely memorized. And what I mean by that is You didn't just memorize it, you know exactly every bit of that verse and what it means to you. You could do a sermon on that verse. And you do that, and you will have new thinking too. And I think this is exactly what Christ was teaching us, because every time he was tempted, he said, "Thus saith the Lord," or "it is written." So we don't have to manufacture thoughts necessarily. Sometimes we just have to take what's already in the Bible and use it for ourselves. I hope this is helpful for you. I hope you will use it. And you're always welcome to come visit me if you need to. But hopefully I'm saving a bunch of people from having to do that. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, is this recorded?
Well, technically not this one, but there is on Audioverse. I have a talk called Steps to Christ-like Thinking. This is how I do it now when I have a whiteboard. I didn't have a whiteboard in that recording, so it's not as, I think it's better now. So we improve and we grow from day to day, and I think I have with this. So you're welcome to take a picture and practice this. And I'm sure you'll see something along the lines of this later on in your education here, but continue to use this as you go through. And the cool thing is you are all here doing this, so it's not like if you go back to your room or something and something comes up, nobody else is going to know. All you have to do is ask somebody else. And what I like to tell people is, how do you know you've really learned something? Okay. What did you say? Yes, when you can teach it to somebody else. So don't go around telling them, hey, you need some help with your thinking. But when somebody is struggling, say, hey, do you know something that really worked for me? And it would really help me to practice it more by teaching it to you. Would that be okay? And now it doesn't look like you're trying to fix them so much. You're just doing it for yourself. But it will help them. I call those twofers. 2 for 1. I teach you and you teach somebody else, and we have this nice ripple effect, and it goes out for everybody. So I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Can I pray before you guys leave?
Can I ask one final?
Yes.
I have been working, I'm a pastor.
Okay.
I have been working with individuals that come from various backgrounds, and some of them need this. If I need it, I believe other pastors like me will need it also.
Everybody needs
Everybody
this.
needs it. So may I request if you can do the same thing like what you just did tonight, and then have it video recorded or maybe like a podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be my request to you.
Oh yeah, it might be recorded somewhere. I just haven't recorded it. But if you want to invite me to your church, I'll come and you can record it there.
I will be here for a year, so.
Okay. I usually teach. I actually just taught this at iShare last Saturday or Sabbath. So I do this all the time. This is the foundation of everything I teach. I talk about guilt based on this concept. I talk about pain and persecution based on this concept. But this is the foundation of everything that I teach, and I teach people how to think about those things. Because often we have a really bad relationship with our emotions and our thoughts because we don't know how to deal with them. And I like to say that when you're really healthy, being in your head will be a really pleasant place to be. I haven't always felt that way, but I love thinking now because I know how to do it. Yes?
We did a depression recovery program at our church a few years back, and this was part of that. It seems like one of the books that you have.
Yes, there's if you want to get the book SOS, Help for Emotions, this concept is in there, but in the book, yeah. And it's a little different because anytime you have somebody teach it, they teach it. This is not Dr. Lynn Clark's version of this. This is Amanda Anguish's version. So, but
I like the fact that you integrate the biblical values in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in many of the books that we read, it doesn't include the religious and the God, elements in it. So.
Yeah, if you read the Mind, Character, and Personality, you will notice that all of the things I was talking about, it'll refresh your mind now when you go back and read it again, and you go, wow, that's so true the way that works, because you'll see it from this perspective too while you're reading it. So read the chapter on thought control at least, and then there's a bunch of other chapters on happiness and doubt and worry and all that stuff, and you'll see that it's all in there. She just says it before it. Cognitive behavioral therapy, we give credit to Aaron Beck because he's the one who came up with it, but this is actually a biblical concept. What does Philippians 4 verse 8 say? Yes, all these really healthy ways of thinking, and then it puts the exclamation point at the end. It says, think on these. It's not irrational thoughts, it's true and helpful thoughts that we're supposed to think on. So, yeah, let's pray before we end. Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you so, so much that you gave us these wonderful minds, and some of us are struggling with our minds right now because we haven't learned how to think. But I thank you, Lord, that in your word you've given us evidences of your care and concern for the way that we use our minds. And I ask, because of tonight, that each one of the people who are here, that now they have a new way of considering how to use their mind and thought control and proper government of their thinking, and that you will bless those efforts and multiply them. And I just thank you that you've given us Jesus to show from his example how we can think too. And I ask all these things in his name. Amen.